Okay, hello again. Right. Now, how is cultural materialism different from new historicism? How is it different from new historicism? We talked about two historical theories. One is called new historicism, and the second is called cultural materialism. But why do we need two types of theories, and what is the difference between them? Cultural materialism is often linked in discussion with new historicism. New historicism is American, cultural materialism is British. Though the two movements belong to the same family, there is an ongoing family quarrel between them. So they come from the same family, but there are always fights in the families. Political Shakespeare, the first product of cultural materialist theoreticians, Political Shakespeare includes new historicist essays, and the introduction explains some of the differences between the two movements. So, what is it? Firstly, the first distinction is cultural materialists, they say, tend to concentrate on the interventions whereby men and women make their own history. Important difference, New historicism look at a novel and they try to find the historical conditions beyond the story. Cultural materialists, on the other hand, look at the novel and they claim that they try to find out how those characters make history, how those characters are influential in changing the history, not how they are influenced by history. Okay, that's a very Marxist point of view, because in Marxist thinking, everybody has a historical function. All right, even though you don't do anything, even though you do nothing in your life, that's a historical action. You don't do anything in history, and that's influential in the historical flow of events. So you have to be a part of history all the time. You are naturally a part of history all the time in Marxist thinking. So cultural materialists see the literary texts and literary characters like that. They are all a part of history and they are all making a history. So, and yes, whereas new historicists tend to focus on the less than ideal circumstances in which they do so. The result is a contrast between political optimism and political pessimism. All right, so cultural materialists are politically optimistic, so they always hope for a change in future, while political pessimism is new historicism. They don't hope for any change in future, and this is the cultural result. This is not cultural result, this is the historical result, and we are here. Secondly, cultural materialists see new historicists as cutting themselves off from effective political oppositions by their acceptance of a particular version of post-structuralism, with its radical skepticism about the possibility of attaining a secure knowledge. So, according to cultural materialists, new historicists are too much limited by post-structuralism, and they are always skeptical of having definite knowledge, because post-structuralism believes that it's impossible to reach definite knowledge. Never. We can never find definite knowledge. The rise of post-structuralism problematizes knowledge, language, truth, and this perspective is absorbed into new historicism and becomes an important part of it. So knowledge is problematic, knowledge is suspicious, knowledge is never definite. So this is a major part of new historicism. Okay, and New historicist defense against this charge would be that being aware of the inbuilt uncertainty of all knowledge doesn't mean that we give up trying to establish truth. So, cultural materialists think that we can establish truth. We can find the truth. All right? There's always some truth everywhere, according to cultural materialists. A third important difference between new historicism and cultural materialism is that where the former's quote texts are documents contemporary with Shakespeare, the letters may be program notes for a current royal Shakespeare. Okay, New historicism believes that, for example, in order to read Shakespeare, we have to read the critical texts and historical texts of that time. But cultural materialists believe that no, we don't have to read critical and theoretical text of the time. Even the tickets, theater tickets, or the brochures of a play may be historical sources for us. All right, just a moment, please. And, okay, so this is the major difference between them. Let me try to do this. No, I cannot. For example, quotations of Shakespeare by a contemporary warplane pilot, or pronouncements on education by a government minister can be examples for history. Everything, all the cultural materials are historical materials in cultural materialism. So let's put this in another way. New historicist situates the literary text in the political situation of its own day, while the cultural materialist situates it within that of ours. So, that's an important difference. New historicists believe that all the texts should be read in relation to its own time. However, cultural materialism believes that no, we can read a text even if it was written 500 years ago, we can read it in relation to our time. All right? We can read today through those works. This is really to restate the difference in political emphasis between the two approaches. Indeed, it could be said that all three of the differences just described have this political difference as their common denominator. What cultural materialist critics do, then? Let me do this one. They read the literary text in such a way as to enable us to recover its histories, that is, the context of exploitation from which it emerged, and at the same time, they foreground those elements in the work's present transmission and contextualizing which caused those histories to be lost in the first place. So, cultural materialists foreground those elements in the work's present transmission at the time of its writing, contextualizing which caused those histories to be lost in the first place. For example, the heritage industry's packaging of Shakespeare in terms of history, national bard or cultural icon, and so on. They use a combination of Marxist and feminist approaches to the text, and they use a technique of close textual analysis, but often employ structuralist and post-structuralist techniques, especially to mark a break with the inherited tradition of close textual analysis within the framework of conservative cultural and social assumptions. At the same time, they work mainly within traditional notions of the canon on the grounds that writing about more obscure texts hardly ever constitutes an effective political intervention. All right, so let me stop here. If I can connect tonight again, I will continue my lecture, but there is an internet problem. All right, I see you next week.